So I'm very happy to welcome you to the Testing at Scale panel. So I'm thrilled that the Global Works Hub in Education is set up to help bridge the gap between evidence and implementation at scale in education programs. I think one of the things that I've been reflecting on is since the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel, there's an emerging consensus of the types of programs that are effective to drive learning. And there's still a huge gap, as noted earlier this morning, about this consensus and having programs that are owned, implemented, sustained, and scaled by governments in low and middle income countries. So to Abhijit Singh's earlier point, I think there's plenty of scope for looking at new innovations, new classifications of innovations. But then to Noam's point, huge returns about thinking how the innovations that have been tested and shown to be cost effective can be better scaled and owned through government systems. This is something near and dear to my heart. So half my role at JPAL is to lead an evidence to scale team. And I'm very happy that part of what the Works Hub is focusing on is how to integrate research into the scaling process. So for today's panel, we've got 4 presentations evaluating the scale up of structured pedagogy and teaching at the right level programs in India, Malawi, Madagascar, and Zambia. They all involve collaborations with the government. In some cases, implementation is done by volunteers in government schools or with hands-on support from school management systems. In other cases, it's very much teacher-driven, teacher-owned with light touch support. And so these presentations, they will not be at scale evaluations in terms of the randomization unit being higher than the school, but they're very much innovations they're very much looking at the scaling process. So the studies are part of much bigger scaling efforts, as you will hear. So let me get out of the way between myself and the presenters. I'm going to welcome Jeff McManus. He's a senior economist at the technical team at IDInsight. He oversees the technical design and analysis of impact evaluations, and he'll be presenting on 2 RCTs of a remedial education program in India, which were conducted when the program was at different stages in its journey to scale. So Jeff, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, John. So as John said, my name is Jeff. I work at IDInsight. And I'm going to be talking about 2 RCTs that we did in collaboration with Sambodhi Research and Communication in India, looking at the same remedial education program run by an organization called Educate Girls, as Educate Girls got much larger in size. And I'm privileged today that we have the founder from Educate Girls, Safina Hussain, with us. So I'm mainly going to be talking about kind of what we found in these 2 studies. But during the Q&A or after the session, if you're interested, Safina is very happy to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and talk about how Educate Girls accomplished what they did, which is to not only maintain impact on learning outcomes as they got bigger, but actually increase impact. So I think there's a kind of a common conception and hopefully a misconception at this point that as programs get larger, they tend to diminish in impact. And this is, this phenomenon has been documented in several different countries. And a big reason for that, often cited, is that as programs get larger, it's harder to maintain implementation fidelity. So say you're running a pilot program, you might have the best teachers, the best staff, the best volunteers available to run that. As you scale, it becomes increasingly hard to recruit, such highly qualified individuals. It also becomes harder and harder to monitor, intensively monitor a program as it scales and make sure that it's kind of adhering to the design. But all of these reasons why you might expect a program to diminish in impact as it scales, you could come up with similar reasons why it might increase in impact. For instance, as an organization implements over time, maybe they learn how to deliver the program more effectively, more efficiently. They often will take systems that were ad hoc, in a pilot or a proof of concept study and kind of invest in them, make them more formalized and established, including things like monitoring systems to get real-time data on performance. And hopefully as programs scale, they can either be adopted by government or have some kind of complementarity with government delivery that can further magnify impact. And I'll kind of touch on this at the very end of the presentation, how Educate Girls is starting to do this. So the question, of course, is when do the balance of positive factors outweigh the negative ones? So the case I'll be talking about comes from India. It's a remedial education program run by Educate Girls. Educate Girls runs a variety of programs in rural, remote communities in northern India. The specific one we're going to be focusing on today is their learning intervention called Gyan-Ka-Patara, or GKP, which is kind of based on two design principles. The first, universal design for learning, making learning accessible through multiple means of engagement for learners with different needs. The other, a lot of elements of their program based in structured pedagogy, including things like very detailed lesson plans for the facilitators to follow. This is an in-school remediation program in government primary schools for grades 3, 4, and 5. So a lot of the material covers the curriculum from grades 1 and 2 that, for a variety of reasons, many children have not mastered by the time they get to grade 3. Focuses on Hindi, math, and English foundational skills. An element of it is targeted, where students are placed into 3 different groups based on assessed learning outcomes, and instruction is targeted to those groups, so some elements of TARL in there. It's quite intensive, 2 hours per day, 3 days per week throughout the school year, so we're talking about close to like 140 sessions that will happen in a school that children will be exposed to. And it's delivered by Educate Girls' kind of large network of volunteers, the Team Balika, who are locally recruited and trained by Educate Girls to deliver this program as well as Educate Girls' other programs. So during the 2 RCTs, as well as between the RCTs, Educate Girls grew quite a bit. So by the end of the first RCT, Educate Girls was working in about 13,000 villages throughout Rajasthan. By the end of the second RCT, they're in 35,000 villages across 4 states, with the GKP specifically being implemented in more than half of those. And just to kind of be upfront about this, the RCTs themselves did not draw from a representative sample of all villages where GKP was being implemented, kind of for operational as well as political reasons. Sites were selected where we could randomize the rollout. But that being said, I think these locations are pretty typical of the types of rural, remote places where Educate Girls works, where there are very low kind of educational outcomes at baseline. And then at least in the second RCT, in addition to the RCT itself, we also went to a representative sample of villages across the 4 states to verify program activities. And so we can at least say there that there's kind of consistent implementation across the states where Educate Girls is working. So pretty straightforward, simple, clustered randomized design. In the first RCT, we're talking about villages that are randomly assigned to either treatment or control. And then we selected a stratified random sample of children who were in grades that would eventually receive the GKP. And then we track that same cohort of students from baseline through each of the follow-up assessments. Second RCT, very similar. One tweak is that it's kind of a stepped wedge design where the intervention is being rolled out to successive cohorts of schools. Even so, I'm mainly going to focus on the results comparing the T1 treatment schools that got the program throughout the length of the study versus the control schools, so we can talk a little bit about the evolution of treatment effects over time. First RCT was 3 years with annual assessments. Second RCT, 2 years. Initially intended to be longer, but due to COVID and school closures, it's kind of a delayed start, so we ended up getting to study the effects of the program over 2 years. And then in both RCTs, we used a modified ASER tool to measure basic foundational skills in Hindi, math, and English. Each of these subjects graded on a rubric of a student could get between 1 and 5. These are one-on-one assessments administered by an enumerator to students. One difference in the second RCT is we kind of added in these intermediate skills to get a little more granularity in terms of measuring learning outcomes, but still on that same 1 to 5 scale for each subject, so that we can kind of talk about effect sizes across the two RCTs. All right, so what do we find? I'm going to be showing the results of the first RCT on the left and then the second RCT on the right. And so first, what we see are significant learning gains that grow over time, both within the two RCTs and then from the first RCT to the second RCT. So what I'm showing here are the average OSSER scores for the treatment group versus the control group at each assessment point in time. And specifically for grade 3, and the reason I show for students who are in grade 3 at baseline is because they were part of the program in treatment schools for the length of the RCT, so we can kind of see the evolution of treatment effects over time. And so as you can see for the first RCT, there are kind of significant but modest gains in the first 2 years, but then an inflection point in the third year where treatment kind of really takes off, so that by the end of the third year, on average, children in treatment schools are scoring 1.7 OSSER points higher than children in control schools, which corresponds to about a half a standard deviation effect size. In the second RCT, again, in the first year, we see that, kind of modest, significant but modest gains, but then the inflection point happens in the second year, and treatment not only really takes off, the control group also kind of levels off a little bit, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But by the end of the second year, we're seeing really large effects, children in treatment schools scoring more than 4 points on average compared to the control students, corresponding to over 1 standard deviation effect sizes. And then just briefly, I'm going to go into a few subgroups. We essentially see effects across the board. So what I'm showing you here are treatment effects in the first year of the RCT versus the last year of the RCT. And this first cut is by grade. So for instance, in the first year of the RCT, in the first RCT, we see, positive but not significant treatment effects for students in grade 3. By the end of the third year, we see children who are in grade 3 in the third year, really big effect sizes, even though they've only received the program for 1 year. So really a jump, and then this jump is even more magnified in the second RCT. So really rapid increases in impact over time. In terms of subject, we see significant effects across the 3 subjects, but relatively more so in math and English. Across the genders, we see significant and similar effect sizes for boys and girls, and also a similar pattern where there's that jump from the first year to the second year. And then we can compare this, these effect sizes to other programs looking at remedial education in India. The first RCT kind of, in the upper part of that distribution of effect sizes, a little more than half a standard deviation, but then the second RCT finding effect sizes that are quite off the charts. And so what can we learn from this? I think that there are some, specific contextual factors that explain some of the growth and effect sizes, but hopefully also some general lessons that other implementers can take as they grow their programs. So as I mentioned, effects grow over time, both within experiments and across experiments. Within experiments, I think a lot of this is explained by the fact that first year is really just devoted to groundwork, to recruiting the local volunteers, training them, establishing relationships with the teachers and with the parents. And it actually takes a little bit of time before the GKP sessions start to take place within classrooms. Whereas in the second year, GKP can start right at the beginning and go throughout the school year. So I think kind of a slow start, but then a ramp up explains some of that. Something I don't really have much time to get into, but is pretty interesting as well, is that in both of the RCTs, or during both of the RCTs, Educate Girls funding was coming from outcomes-focused funding. So I think one of the presenters, Claire, was talking about this a little bit with the Education Outcomes Fund, and how being outcomes-focused allows implementers to really experiment and optimize the design, because they're not responsible for delivering really specific inputs. And we see this in the Educate Girls case. In the first RCT, for instance, they had an entirely different curriculum for remedial education, which after that first year with very modest gains, they essentially turned away from and adopted the GKP in response to the data that was coming in that was showing they had room for more growth. We also see, in terms of across experiments, we see, Educate Girls making these program improvements over time, so that by the second RCT, it's a stronger, well-oiled machine. They've made a lot of investments in systems in terms of monitoring systems for performance management. I think there are also some population differences where the second RCT happened right after children were returning to school. It was the first normal year after COVID. And so baseline learning levels were lower. There was kind of more room for growth. But finally, some stories that are starting to trickle in now are about how the Educate Girls program kind of complemented government delivery. One through complementarities with the Nippon Bharat, which I think Abhijit was touching on during his presentation earlier. And I think it'll be really interesting actually for Abhijit to speak with the EG team, because the stories that are coming in anecdotally are that the EG volunteers were really able to support and possibly mentor or coach in some way teachers with some of the new Nippon Bharat interventions. But also, as I mentioned, there's kind of this leveling off of growth in the control group in the second year of the second RCT, in contrast to the first RCT where you see sort of linear growth in the control group. In the second RCT, you see this drop, this leveling off, which we attribute to various systemic factors. For instance, there were floods in Madhya Pradesh during this year. Schools were sometimes affected by that. There were elections, which can disrupt the school calendar as well. But during this time, Educate Girls is essentially able to fill in and continue to run their GKP program in treatment school. So I think this is a really interesting story that we're just starting to dig into a little bit about how implementers at scale can really complement and support government delivery. So just to conclude, I think increasing returns to scale are possible when organizations are given the flexibility to learn and improve and adapt their programming over time and make investments in core systems like performance management. Hopefully there are some really cool opportunities for when organizations can complement government delivery that can really lead to impact taking off. And then the next sort of area that Educate Girls is starting to explore are what are the different models that we can use to scale. So historically, they've done a lot of scaling through direct implementation, but now they're starting to partner directly with governments in certain states through technical assistance. They're also partnering with local NGOs. And I think, the next really interesting question is, how do these different models of scale work? Which ones are leading to similar results of seeing impact grow as the program scales? So thanks.
Next, I want to welcome Lontum Ncahdze. He is a doctoral candidate at the School of Public Policy at Oregon State University. His interest is in applying experimental methods, causal inference, and data science to identify effective solutions in international development. He's going to be presenting on an impact evaluation of Malawi's national Numeracy program, part of a larger effort to improve numeracy outcomes at scale in Malawi. Thanks so much, Shay.
Hey, hi, everyone. Yeah, so as I was introduced, I'll be presenting this impact evaluation of the National Numeracy Program in Malawi, which is part of a wider effort to scale up an intervention program in Malawi. So these are the numerous diverse research partners I've worked with. My advisor is here. Ariana is also here. So ask them the tough questions. So, yeah, I'm kidding. Ask me questions. All right. So, yeah, so there is some context to this, as I think Norm had alluded to this in his opening remarks about the learning crisis, which kind of got exacerbated by the pandemic. But there are some additional elements to this. I think it's a good thing. The fact that this room is filled already indicates the kind of donor and practitioner interest in this problem, which is a good thing. But then we also find that literacy garners more attention than numeracy. The truth is that students are struggling in both these domains, and depending on how you think about it, they're receiving a bigger problem in numeracy that in the long term is going to have negative consequences on life outcomes of these kids. So for instance, we did a Google Scholar search, and we found that foundational literacy has like 11 times more results than literacy. So this is just an experience, an example of this problem, both it's both in the policy domain, but in the research domain and in many spheres. So with regards to numeracy, we find that the situation in Malawi is even more concerning. So like there is this, the regional exams that students in Southern Africa take, and students in Malawi consistently underperform their counterparts in the region. We found that more than 80% could not even conduct two-digit subtraction at the end of grade 2. Yeah, and so I'll talk a bit about the study, but I'll actually kind of merge this with a broader discussion about the program we are evaluating. So in order to try to address this problem, the government of Malawi, through the Ministry of Education, in collaboration with FCDO and Cambridge Education, started this program called the National Numeracy Program. So this is largely a new pedagogy that seeks to promote critical thinking. So it tries to deviate from the old curriculum that focuses on rote learning to one that focuses on helping, enabling students to be able to make meaning from the mathematics they learn, to adopt more of a problem-solving mentality, and also to apply the mathematics they learn to real-world situations. And there are a number of aspects of the program that are actually meant to ensure this. So we evaluated this program using a cluster randomized control design in 150 schools. So we have 75 schools in the treatment group and 75 schools in the control group. But this program is concurrently so this is actually an extended pilot covering over 1,100 schools nationally. So in a sense, this is actually like contributing to the further scale up of this program. So this study we conducted is going to at least help us add additional evidence to the body of knowledge on early grade numeracy interventions. Like I think there was that RTI International study that found that found only 8 studies with evidence of numeracy intervention. So we think that the body of knowledge is still relatively limited. So we are contributing to that body of knowledge, but we are also contributing to the broader knowledge on curriculum reforms. We are also contributing to the whole concept of foundational learning programs implemented at scale. But even more importantly, we're helping to provide a type of evidence that will help the government of Malawi to scale up this program nationally. So again, this program we're actually evaluating has a story. I would have loved to come and sit here and say that the geniuses in FCDO and the Malawi government came together, developed this fantastic program, ran it for 1 year, and we had these fantastic results. But yeah, the true short story, and Ariana can tell you a longer story because she's actually the repository of the knowledge behind this program, from the scoping study to where it is currently. So the previous curriculum was very focused on rote learning. The learning environment did not really support effective learning. There were lots of routine procedures. Like I think, I don't know about most of you here, but like even growing up, we used to like get into class after break and just sing the timetables. I don't know, I'm not sure most of us actually knew what we were doing. So there was really a lot of that in the previous curriculum. So as you can see, this is from the previous curriculum. So you see that like there are 18 exercises, but there is no commentary, there is no context. The language is in Chichewa, even though I think the new policy was to teach in English. But I guess the key issue here is just the fact that there is limited context in what the students are required to do. So, but what is this new program about? So, this the various actors developed this program, and then it actually went through a series of iterations. So I think that's also an important thing here about how, like, this adaptation and learning that Jeffrey was talking about. So first of all, the problem was established through different mechanisms, including the regional exams I just talked about. But then there was this scoping study that kind of like identified the opportunities and challenges, but more importantly, the opportunities, because at least from there, you see the enthusiasm that teachers have, you see their interest in educating children, you see the willingness of government, which I also think is very important, because I believe that you have to design for scale, and part of it, especially in developing countries, is making sure there is government buy-in from the very origin. So they identified all of those, then they developed a previous version of the program, piloted it in 200 schools, did a pilot evaluation of that initial rollout, used it to inform further adjustments to the program, and then did an extended pilot in 1,100 schools for the 2022-2023 academic year. In 2023, they then asked us to come and do an evaluation of that extended pilot, to do a full-scale impact evaluation of that extended pilot. And this evidence will be used to inform the nationwide scale-up of the program, which has already begun in grades 1 and 2, and will proceed to further grades. So as I said before, this curriculum emphasizes problem-solving, critical thinking, and sense-making of mathematics. So it starts with, so first there is this new curriculum that emphasizes all these things, but you don't just design a curriculum and give it to teachers and ask them to teach it. So there's also the teacher training component, and even after the initial teacher training at the beginning of the term, there are also other avenues, like there is coaching, there is teacher learning circles that go on in schools. There are like expert teachers that serve as mentors to coordinate these teacher learning circles. There are materials that are designed to go with the curriculum. So you have like learner workbooks. So each child has a learner workbook that they write on, and so the teachers don't have to spend disproportionate amount of time copying it on the board, and maybe students copying them incorrectly. So there are just these various elements of the project. And then the lessons are also interactive. Then there are teacher guides to support all of that. So if you look at like this is a page from the learner workbook. So you notice first of all that there are images used to represent what is being taught. They also draw from the local environment, like you have cassavas. They also try to get meaning from what the students are learning. Like for instance, how did you get that? So it's like requires them to reflect on what they are doing. So yeah, so for the design, as I said, it's a cluster RCT in 150 schools within 3 regions of the country, 75 in treatment, 75 in control. So we formed them into match pairs within these 3 districts. So there are actually four schools in each pair, 2 treatment, 2 control, then 1 each will go into the study. Then we also have 1 each that are reserved to be replaced in case we run into problems. Yeah, so and then the treatment also continues in the 1,100 schools in the other districts where the extended pilot was already going on. But that extended, the districts where we did the impact evaluation were not part of the extended pilot. So these districts were just added for the sake of the impact evaluation. So the data at baseline, that's October 2023, we collected baseline data. And this included ECMA, classroom, head teacher surveys, student surveys, parent surveys. All of these gave us different types of information. And then at end line, we collected the same data except for the parent survey, but then we also did classroom observations and teacher and teacher surveys. Yeah, and for students, we assess the same students we assessed at baseline. So the methodology.
3 minutes.
Okay, yeah, so the main outcome is the early grade mathematics assessment, which we standardized by the control group distribution of each grade, such that the average for each grade is going to be 0, and that was our main outcome. And so we compare the performance of students in treatment and that's this outcome for students in treatment and control groups. We cluster standard errors by strata, which is the match pairs. Yeah. So these are some key results. So we found that remember this the incubation period for this was 1 year, and we found that for the entire sample there was a 0.19 standard deviation increase in the standardized ECMA scores. So because of so at baseline there were small differences, especially for higher standards like standard 4, and so we controlled for that at N9, and we realized that the effect still stand. So this is the distribution of ECMA scores at baseline. This is the distribution at N9. So what you find is that there's more overlap at baseline, at N9 the treatment group shifts a little, at least to show that impact. So we did look at this. We did look at the effects for different, that's sub-heterogeneity, and we did find that, like in terms of the ECMA distribution at baseline, we did find that the effects were bigger for students who did better at baseline. So it looks like stronger students benefited the most from the project. Yeah, and then we also found, for instance, that students from socioeconomically stronger backgrounds also did better. We found that girls did better than boys, overall in the program. So these are just some measures of efficacy, because there are some important aspects I wanted to that the project seeks to focus on. So we have them here. This was mostly from treatment group school. So we do see that these are from classroom observations, and that observers noted that teachers generally implemented these relatively well, I mean, from 65% to 95%. So of course there are opportunities for improvement, but they generally did well. Okay, yeah, so we have effects on curriculum implementation, which in terms of curriculum implementation, we did find significant treatment effects. In terms of teaching quality, we also found significant effects. We could talk more about those. But we are continuing to explore these results, actually looking at in those areas of heterogeneity, for instance, why did poor students not do as well? Why are students who are struggling at baseline being left behind? So we're going to explore more of these, and I think these are going to inform the scale up of the project. Yeah, so these are our partners. Thank you so much.
Shay, thank you so much. And both Shay and the research team and Jeff were really pushing to get these results out to share with us in the conference, and we're grateful for that. Next, I want to introduce Takao Maruyama. He's a senior research fellow at JICA-supported Research Institute. He was previously a policymaker with JICA, now as a researcher after earning his PhD. And he would be presenting a case study of a JICA-supported project on an iterative process of generating and using evidence to address the learning crisis in Madagascar. Maruyama-san.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is a very much wonderful opportunity to share our experience. As kindly introduced by John, I'm Takao Maruyama from Ogata JICA-supported Research Institute. I joined JICA in 2002 and get involved in the project operations over 10 years. And later I moved to the research site and conducted several impact evaluations in Madagascar. Today, I'd like to talk about an example of the iterative process of generating and using evidence to address the learning crisis in Madagascar. The cases from the JICA-supported project called School for All. My presentation focuses on the aspect of the management of the process rather than the specific contents of the impact evaluations. My presentation talks about a synergy between research and practice to change policy making and practice in education and development. From a practitioner's perspective, it is very tough to run one impact evaluation for a pilot, as it requires logistical and planning coordination between the researchers and the practitioners' project team. However, development agencies should iteratively conduct impact evaluations, as it is not certain that they can reproduce the impact of the pilot in the scaling up in a country or scaling out to other countries. From a pilot to scaling up, it is often necessary to modify the implementation structure of interventions, reducing the cost, and also conduct interventions in a less controlled environment. When scaling out to other countries, it is not certain whether the intervention works when the intervention is adapted to the different contexts. The intervention package or the scaling up strategy should be also continuously upgraded to address such issues in scaling up or scaling out, as well as responding to the different needs in education. For development agencies whose rationality are generally bounded, the iterative implementation of impact evaluation is the process of the search for a better option to achieve the mission. Since 2017, JICA has collaborated with Pratam, now Pratam International, and TAL Africa to support the Ministry of Education in Madagascar in addressing the learning crisis. Madagascar is a low-income country. Approximately 80% of the population are living in poverty. In primary education, the student survival rate is extremely low. Only 3 out of 10 children who entered primary schools reach the last grade of primary. The learning outcome is also low. Around 80% of students of last grade in primary are not reaching to the minimum proficiency level in language and math. To address the learning crisis in Madagascar, with the technical support from Pratam, the Ministry of Education in Madagascar and JICA developed a package of interventions. The package consists of the 2 components. One is school management, and the other is about pedagogy. The pedagogy component is a training of teaching at the right level and the provision of teaching and learning materials. The school management components includes a series of training to improve the functionality of the school management committees. For example, participants, school principals learn how to conduct a secret ballot to establish the committee, and the representatives of SMC learn how to develop the action plan in collaboration with school and the local community. What the intervention package aimed to realize was the integration of remedial activities using TAR in the action plan cycle of the SMC. The SMC conducts the assessment in foundational literacy and numeracy, and it shared the results at the Community General Assembly to develop the action plan. The action plan lists various activities, including remedial activities using TAR, to be implemented by the local actors, teachers, parents, and local community members. Remedial activities using TAR are delivered for children by teachers and community volunteers at schools. The assessment results after the remedial activities motivate the school and the local community to continue the effort. The SMC and school action plan function as a vehicle to deliver the remedial activity using TAL for children. We developed and updated the learning agenda from a pilot to the scaling up. First, after the development of the package of interventions, we were curious if it improved foundational literacy and numeracy. We planned and conducted an RCT for the pilot in a region in Madagascar. The results were positive, 0.4 standard deviation improvement in math, and 20% point increase in the paragraph for story level students. The results supported the scaling up of the package of intervention in the country. Second, we were interested in whether the impact on foundational literacy was reproduced in the scaling up of the package with the modified implementation structure and reduced unit cost. And we conducted a survey for the schools near the regional border. As the intervention was scaled up progressively to increase the coverage of regions, we tried to evaluate the impact of the scaled up interventions using the difference in differences strategy. We also checked the school level learning assessment and monitoring data. The impact on foundational literacy in the scaling up was positive but attenuated compared to the pilot. We reviewed the scaled up interventions and concluded that the distribution of learning materials was reduced too much. The quality of training varied according to the capacity of trainers. We also found that the implementation of the TAL training needed to be improved. Then third, the remedial activities in foundational numeracy was scaled up. Based on the lessons in the previous step, we limited the cost reduction in the distribution of teaching and learning material numeracy in the scaled up interventions. The supporting structure for trainers of TAL was also improved. We conducted a follow-up survey for schools near the regional border to see if the impact on foundational numeracy was reproduced. We also checked the school-level learning assessment and monitoring data. The results indicated that the magnitude of the impact was at a similar level compared to the pilot. In Madagascar, evidence was fed back to the Ministry of Education and partners for their policy making and practice. Evidence supported the offshore adoption of the intervention package and the scaling up. While there were several options for the SMC training module, the Ministry of Education officially adopted the version developed with the technical cooperation from JICA for the national version. Evidence is also referred by the regional office of the Ministry of Education when they develop region-wide initiatives to improve foundational learning. As shown in the map of the slide, since 2020, the package of interventions has been scaled up progressively to increase the coverage of regions involving different partners. Now, 21 regions out of 23 are being covered or targeted. The scaling up the package is estimated to cover approximately 2 million children, which is half of children enrolled in a school. Evidence was also fed back to the JICA headquarters in Japan. JICA revised its education sector strategy in 2023 to address better the learning crisis. Evidence supported mainstreaming the approach of the intervention package in the JICA education sector strategy. Now, community-wide collaboration for learning improvement is one of the 4 pillars of the education sector strategy. Evidence also helped JICA communicate the value of the approach globally. The intervention package was selected as a good practice in numeracy in low-income countries in the numeracy at scale study. The partnership between research and practice developed in the impact evaluations for the package called PMAC-TAL further forged a new learning agenda in pre-primary education and continuous development of the package in primary education to address the issues of student repetition and dropout in Madagascar. In pre-primary education, the Ministry of Education and JICA developed a set of simple picture story shows for children. We were curious about how the simple teaching material improved the children's behavior and learning, and we conducted a small-scale RCT. Now we are preparing for the next round of RCT in Madagascar to verify the impact of the upgraded package of interventions to address the issue of student repetition and dropout. In the operation, we felt that it was not sufficient to improve the learning of children who were in school in the context of very low survival rate. Without addressing the issue of student dropout, the learning crisis would remain. Researchers and the project team shared the objective and jointly worked to seize windows of opportunity to run impact evaluations and feedback the findings of the policy making and practice. The collaboration between researchers and practitioners in the Madagascar case is described in this slide. On the right hand, JICA developed a partnership with the Ministry of Education in Madagascar to run a project. Through the project activities, the project team and the Ministry of Education identified a new learning agenda to better address challenges in education. In the left cycle, the project team collaborated with researchers. Learning agenda was refined through a communication between the project team and researchers. The project team developed the package of interventions, and researchers verified the effectiveness. After the data analysis, both sides discussed the results from the evaluation and collaborated to feedback the findings to the policy making and the practice at right timing in Madagascar and JICA. The rationality of development agencies is generally bounded. They should conduct a search for better options to achieve their mission. When the better option is found, the expectation of the performance of the organization is raised. When the gap between the mission of the organization and the performance still remains, it raises the aspiration of the organization to search for better options. This cycle led development agencies to conduct impact evaluations iteratively. What works hard for global education would accelerate, continuous evidence generation and useful policy making and practice by developing global learning agenda and facilitating such process among different agencies to address learning crisis in the world. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Takao. We have our fourth and final presentation. Sharon Schroen is the Global Strategic Research Advisor at VVOB, where she provides strategic guidance to research projects, develop the organization's research policies, and supports in-country research teams. We're going to take a break from the impact evaluations. She'll be presenting a mixed methods study, which was started to understand teachers' motivation and behavior, to eventually design and test additional small interventions to improve teachers' motivation and effort in the Teaching at the Right Level program in Zambia. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, John, and hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here and present on this research. This research has been conducted by Bursara, so I'm presenting on behalf of them. It has been funded by the Gates Foundation, and together with TAL, VVOB is implementing it in Zambia. Now, first, I want to give you a little bit of background about the Teaching at the Right Level program that we use in Zambia. It is actually called Catch Up in Zambia, and it's infused with learning to play elements. Now, as we have seen in many presentations already, also Zambia is struggling with this learning crisis, where increased access to primary education doesn't mean that learners actually catch up with their foundational skills. Now, to tackle this issue, the Zambian government was actually interested in using the TAL approach, using targeted instruction, meeting learners where they're at. They conducted a pilot in 2016, which was successful. And so far, they've rolled out the program to 9 out of 10 provinces, with also plans to roll it out to the final 10 provinces. Now, teachers are, of course, key in determining the effectiveness of TAL because they are the direct implementers in the classroom. And therefore, we really wanted to focus on investigating how can we improve teachers' motivation to conduct a catch-up well. Just a quick recap on how TAL looks like in Zambia. It is unique in its scalability because the Ministry of Education is actually the owner of the program. It takes place during the regular school day, but outside regular class hours, and it's 1 hour of instruction on either language or numeracy. And they focus on local languages in Zambia. They target grades 3 to 5, which learners are typically aged between 8 to 10, sometimes a little bit older. And it's rolled out in government schools. It takes place 3 terms every year, running from January to September. And the role of the MOE, the Ministry of Education, is to provide strategic orientation, to define the policy, and to also implement the program. Now I would like to take you through our research. So we wanted to use behavioral science lens to understand how we could promote teachers' motivation to teach catch-up well in 3 regions in Zambia, Eastern, Southern, and Lusaka provinces. How do we do that? We use a sequential mixed methods approach. First, we wanted to actually understand what challenges are teachers facing. Then we wanted to design solutions for these challenges. And lastly, we wanted to assess the efficacy of these solutions. Now, in the understand phase, one of the first things we wanted to ensure was stakeholder buy-in. So we set up an advisory committee, which consisted of MOE staff and also local researchers who were involved with the design and implementation of the catch-up program. We then used a constructivist perspective to really understand how the teacher's experience is. We conducted 30 in-depth interviews with teachers to understand the barriers and enablers when implementing catch-up. We then quantified these barriers and enablers and conducted 2,000 surveys with teachers to kind of look at what are the relationships between the barriers, the enablers, and catch-up related indicators. Now, in the design phase, we use a participatory approach because we really wanted to co-design solutions that were contextually relevant and also feasible for scale, discussing this together with our key stakeholders. So we facilitated a 2-day design workshop together with teachers, MOE staff, and the advisory committee to do so. Now we're in the last phase, the assess phase, which we're going to collect data from pretty soon. Here we want to test the causal relationships between the solutions that we have designed and important behavioral mechanisms. And to do so, we're going to use randomized controlled lab and field tests. And these tests are basically digitized games that reflect teaching a catch-up program that teachers participate in, and then they are assigned to either a control condition or a condition with solutions embedded in them. And the design of these games has also been a participatory process. We've done multiple feedback rounds with teachers, with the MOE, and also amongst us as implementers. Now, when we were analyzing that rich data we got in the qualitative phase, we used the capability, opportunity, motivation, behavior model to identify which factors influence teachers' capability, opportunity, and motivation to teach catch-up well. And what we found out is that teacher motivation is threefold. So first, an important factor is the individual motivation of the teacher, which has to do with any subjective factors that make a teacher want to teach catch-up well. Key factors here were the self-efficacy of the teacher, the sense of control they experience, and also the individual recognition. Then we have social motivation, which has to do with how recognized teachers feel by the community around them. That can be other teachers, it can also be parents of learners, and it can even be learners themselves and how engaged they are in the classroom. Last, we have institutional motivation. And institutional motivation has to do with how recognized a teacher feels by those in authority. So this is, for example, the MOE. Now, I want to look at a couple of key results that we have found, starting with an important enabler. In general, we found positive social norms around catch-up, both in the way that teachers see other teachers implementing it, but also how teachers feel supported by one another. And particularly, we found a link between teachers supporting one another and higher learner outcomes. Teachers from schools with higher learner progress in either numeracy or literacy were significantly more likely to agree with this statement that whenever a teacher faces a challenge, other teachers will come and help that teacher to deal with catch-up challenges. Of course, there were also important barriers. One was self-efficacy. So you will find that some teachers have really low self-efficacy in implementing the TAL approach for foundational learning, even when they have high curriculum knowledge. And we found that teachers who report higher self-efficacy also had a statistically significant effect on student progress in numeracy. It was greater for these teachers. Also, what is important is that men report higher levels of self-efficacy than women. I know this is not an uncommon finding. We've definitely seen this before. But this didn't correspond to actual student progress. It was not that these men that had higher self-efficacy had also better student progress. At the same time, the Zambian workforce, in terms of teachers, is largely made up of females. So this is something that we want to look into. Another important barrier is that 82% of teachers report an external locus of control when we ask them about student progress. So we give them a scenario about students not progressing through the levels, even though they are in catch-up classes. And we ask them, what do you think could be the reason for this? And of the 4 most cited reasons, 3 were outside of the teacher's control. And this mostly had to do with student absenteeism and the parents' role in students' learning. Now, we got all of these findings. We then first went to teachers to kind of brainstorm with them, like, what do you think could be solutions to kind of address this? And we came up with a whole list of solutions. Then we went to the advisory committee, including the MOE staff, to kind of look at, okay, how can we fine-tune these solutions? What fits within scaling? What is feasible? And then there were eventually 5 solutions that were selected, which are displayed here. Now, as implementing partners, together with our research partner, Busara, we then identified and prioritized some solutions because we can only test so much. And we really wanted to focus on things, what is the impact we think this can have, and what is feasible at scale. Now, one solution that came up was recognizing teachers for their work on catch-up will improve their self-efficacy. And this really aligns with the work we found in the qualitative phase of the research, where we saw that all these different layers of recognition are extremely important for their motivation. The second is having complete and accurate information about what to expect from a catch-up class will increase teachers' sense of control over student outcomes. Through conversations we had with teachers and stakeholders, we found out that teachers don't always know how to deal with challenges that come up when implementing a catch-up class. At the same time, sometimes their expectations about learner progress are unrealistic, and then teachers become disheartened when progress is not as fast as they would expect. Now, we're going to be testing the effects of these different recognition systems and information systems by using a lab in the field approach. There's a picture. Sorry, it's not the clearest picture, but this kind of represents how this might look like. Importantly, one of the key underlying outcome variables we want to look at is level of efforts. And that's because when you think about all the activities that go into catch-up, we know that teachers need to put in long-term effort to plan their lessons and to facilitate these lessons. So in other words, when you look at indicators of what is a well-taught catch-up class, the underlying driver is the same throughout, and that is level of effort. For the behavioral barrier external locus of control, we're going to compare 2 different information provision. Basically looks at how much information is displayed, and then we will compare it to a control group, and we will measure the level of efforts that teachers put into playing this lab game that kind of mimics teaching a catch-up class. We'll also measure the sense of control. For the self-efficacy condition, there are 2 different types of recognition. There's a private one where the teacher receives a direct message from an MOE staff about how they are performing, and nobody else sees that. Or there is a public recognition condition where this information is also shared with other teachers being present. And then, again, we will compare it to a control group and measure the level of efforts and the level of self-efficacy. So now that I've spoken about our research, I would like to take you through two important lessons that we have learned about embedding research in the scaling process. Now, first is that research-informed scaling requires affordability. So one key decision that we took in our research design was to go for lab testing, which is cheaper, faster, and more flexible than traditional RCTs. And lab results can be used as a basis for then further testing, but what was particularly appealing to us is that it can directly be used for decision-making. Now, in terms of affordability, what do we mean with that? We look at the time it takes to collect data. All data from teachers is going to be collected within a 3-week window. We look at the costs. To manage the lab, we need 5 staff to manage that lab. We're also going to lease all lab equipment during the time of data collection, so this significantly reduces our costs. And lastly is the flexibility. The lab is going to be moving around and meeting teachers where they're at, so it will travel to the 3 different regions within which we do research in a couple of weeks. Now, we know that questions about optimizing your programs and scaling, they often come late in the design phase, or sometimes they come when programming happens, because it's so difficult to predict how exactly programming rolls out and what challenges you will have. In these situations, we felt that lab testing can be a very welcome alternative to rigorous testing that requires more long-term planning. For us in particular, we were really interested in approaching this from a behavioral lens perspective and look at teacher motivation that way, kind of iterating on and optimizing the program that has already been rolled out to kind of see which small changes can we make that influences teachers' motivation to teach catch-up well. Now, another important lesson is that research-informed scaling requires acceptability. When you run large programs, you know how many stakeholders are involved, and they're all involved at different stages of the program. Ensuring buy-in from the start, it should be intentional and prioritized. Now, we spoke about how the MOE owns SketchUp. So for us, it was really essential to involve them actively from the beginning, which we did by setting up that advisory committee I spoke about before. We've already had 4 workshops with them so far to kind of keep them up to date about the research, the applications for scaling, but also to generate their inputs. And in between, we are continuously in communication through email to make sure that they always know what's happening and any results are going to flow logically from all that information that has been provided. Having them actively involved has created so much invaluable feedback for us. It has sped up also a lot of approval processes. And there's a really enthusiastic attitude among the MOE about how can we use this data to inform our programming. They have actually already taken the lead on certain activities like organizing dissemination events. And this shows us that there's a lot of buy-in to really use our results. Now, of course, key is also teachers. All our research has been guided by how do teachers perceive and experience catch-up. And by starting inductively with a qualitative approach, we really enriched our understanding of what it is like for teachers. And this has only been further solidified in that whole co-design process. This will make sure that any results we obtain, they are going to speak to the lived realities of those teachers and on what is most important to them. Lastly, of course, this couldn't have happened without the strong collaboration between all the different partners. We have had a lot of discussions also with the Gates Foundation about this research. Busara has come in with their research expertise. TAL brings a repository of knowledge about TAL, the implementation of TAL. And VVOB has brought in their expertise of implementing educational programming closely together with governments. The strong collaboration has ensured that this research speaks to what implementers are facing at site, and I'm very excited I had the chance to present this to you today. Here is the contact information. Please also find Varsha Shok, who is the research lead on this project, if you want more information after the session. Thank you so much.
Great. I'd like to invite all the presenters to come down for Q&A. No one needed reminding of this, but further descriptive evidence of, there is learning crisis. There you see 80% learning poverty in Madagascar, in Malawi. Exciting that there are, through structured pedagogy, teaching at the right level, hopes that the big changes are possible in a relatively short period of time. You see that I know in the pilot in Madagascar, you've got that 0.4 standard deviation, like 3 or 4 months. Also, like with time, that you see increased, like in the second year in India, you see increased impacts, which I think is very encouraging. Lots of different implementation support models. And so from the direct kind of implementation through government schools that we saw in India to different support models supporting government teachers through JICA, through VVOB and Teach at the Right Level Africa, through Cambridge Education. We didn't hear a lot about cost, but in part that's because the effectiveness results are just coming out, and so we'll hear more cost effectiveness analysis. So with that, I'd like to open it up to Q&A from the group. We'll take 3 questions or so, turn it to our panelists, and then I've got a couple of questions that have come in online. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks for the great presentations, everyone. I'm Matthew Jukes at RTI. We did a study called Numeracy at Scale, and I was really pleased to see it mentioned a couple of times. The JICA work in Madagascar kindly allowed us to use us as one of their case studies, and the Malawian presentation mentioned it. One of the conclusions we had, having done this study, this multiple case studies in numeracy and literacy, was that there's a lot more consensus in literacy about what an effective classroom approach is than there is in numeracy. And so I'm kind of interested in, since you have such more direct experience, as to whether we're getting closer to consensus as to what effective instruction is in numeracy. And I guess I'm also asking a question, or maybe just an appeal, since I haven't heard very much about what goes on inside classrooms so far, that the hub could play a role in codifying and disseminating best practice in classroom instruction in both literacy and numeracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Let's take a couple more questions. Wherever you can.
Hi, Akshay Mangla. I teach here at Oxford. I had a question about the program with Educate Girls. Fascinating study and real impacts. I saw in the beginning you started with the political challenges of scaling up, and then you ended with the complementarities between the program and Nipun Bharat. Can you speak to some of the political challenges of achieving that complementarity? Like, one can imagine that there's backlash. Teachers might not want to do multiple programs for multiple principals that might weigh on them, or perhaps with the government. So if you could just walk us through a bit of the messiness of how you achieve that complementarity. Thanks.
Maybe, Jeff, I'll add one question to that came in online, which is, did the package of inputs change over the years? Additionally, how do you differentiate between the effects of the longer exposure and those from the newer design features? One more question from the group. Please. Yes, please, yeah.
Thanks very much. My name's Sabina. I work at FCDO. Full disclosure, I was involved in the Malawi National Numeracy Programme back in 2018 when we were co-designing it with the Ministry of Education. So it's really fantastic to hear the results 6 years later. So I've got a comment and then a question. So Shay kind of touched on the National Numeracy Programme's journey, but I just wanted to emphasise just how long this has taken and how different bits of evidence and data were needed on that kind of scaling journey. So right at the start, when we were doing the design, we had to kind of use international best practice and those international assessments that Shay mentioned, but also lots of kind of qualitative lesson observations to really understand what was going wrong in the classroom that was leading to these low outcomes. And then the first stage of the design, which ended up kind of happening in around kind of 200 schools, was the kind of quasi-experimental design that was really to kind of test the efficacy, I guess, bubble in Noam's nice diagram. But again, that had loads of kind of qualitative data to kind of really try and figure out what was working, what wasn't. And then that first step of scale to go to 1,100 schools, which has been evaluated through the RCT, is almost, yeah, I guess like the efficacy plus on Noam's diagram. And now
Can we get to the question? When you have a chance.
No, sorry, but just to say, but now it's at kind of 6,000 schools as of this month. And I guess the question for all of you is, when do you do the randomized control trial? When is it right on that journey? And do you need to use other approaches? Can you save time and money if you do things in different orders? And I would love to hear thoughts from everyone on that, and also the hub, if they can kind of provide guidance to others on when to do that. Thank you.
So Shay, maybe I'll turn to you first on Matthew Jukes' question related to numeracy at scale, and specifically like what the programs that you've designed and evaluated, what does effective instruction in numeracy look like in Malawi?
Yeah. So in terms of specific classroom practices, I don't think I can speak to that particularly for now, but I think we did gather a lot of data because we did classroom observations, and we are looking forward to like mapping the information, the information we got from these classroom observations to the results, but also looking a bit more detailedly in the conceptual framework that we developed at the beginning of the program. We also have a lot of data that we can use to map the results to all of those. So I think we are going to do additional exploratory analysis and some of which will cover these aspects, because as I said, there are still some questions to answer. For instance, why did students from underprivileged backgrounds suffer? Why did students who are struggling generally academically not benefit the most from the program? So it's not like they suffered, but maybe they didn't benefit the most from the program. So as we unpick some of these elements, we're actually going to identify those types of things that especially classroom practices that we think work well in these settings where these particular students may have thrived better. So that kind of work is still continuing. Then on the question on the question of when it's best to conduct an impact analysis, I'm not sure I have a very good answer to that question. But what I think though is that it's really more important for us, at least what I learned from this project is that the collaboration between stakeholders, or when interests align, I think everyone is interested in ensuring that's like enhancing school outcomes. Even though the evaluations are independent, researchers themselves are educators, so they understand all of this. So what I think is that if there is that sense of collaboration, and if available evidence has been leveraged to build the program to where it is at that point, I think it can be a good time for an impact evaluation.
I mean, for what it's worth, I think the way you've done it in Malawi sounds fantastic. Like you had a quasi-experimental, you did an experimental for up to 1,100 schools and informed scale to 6,000. That sounds pretty ideal. Maybe Jeff, over to you on Akshay's question related to Educate Girls.
Yeah, thanks. I think there were a few questions. I think to maybe tackle them in reverse order. When to do an RCT, agree definitely with Shay. I think our typical guidance is, don't do it too early. You don't want to be measuring something when there are still a lot of implementation challenges, and then you don't really get to see what's the efficacy of the program so much as, what are the effects of some of these implementation challenges. At the same time, I think there's a lot of value in doing an RCT, not only to understand impact and have some level of accountability, but also to inform program design. And we saw this a little bit, at least in the first RCT that we did with Educate Girls, where by having annual assessments and annual data that we could share back with the Educate Girls team, they were really able to take advantage of some of that data and make changes and pivots to their program that I think led to greater effectiveness in the later years. In terms of did the design change over time? Yes, to some extent, definitely in the first RCT where the design of the learning intervention flipped from the first year to the latter years. But I think what also changed a lot over time was just in terms of implementation. I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, that first year, a lot goes towards the groundwork of recruiting volunteers and establishing relationships, and then you really start to see the impacts manifest in later years. And I feel that on the question about whether is the impact driven by longer exposure versus changes in the design or changes in the implementation, I feel pretty confident it's the latter. And the reason is some results that I didn't get a chance to share, but essentially in the second RCT, we had this stepped wedge design where we could actually see what was the impact in the second year for schools that only got the program in the second year. And even for those schools, we see treatment effects that are comparable to the schools that got the program for the first 2 years. Similarly, we see very large effects for children who came into grade 3 in the last year and only got exposed that last year. So feel pretty confident that it's not just the longer exposure, but actually some of the change, strengthening in terms of design and implementation. For the political challenges faced with GKP and integrating that with Nippon Bharat, the one thing I would say is, that I didn't get a chance to talk much about is Educate Girls does a lot of work in terms of collaborating, at a local level and also at a state level to work closely with government. I realize that time is short, but I don't know if I could also punt this a little bit to Safina to share maybe an implementer's perspective on how you were able to accomplish some of this with government.
Thank you. Akshay, the main reason that in the second one we had more complementarity with the government was because Nippon Bharat got launched between the end of the first RCT and the beginning of the second one. So that automatically led to a government alignment because Nippon Bharat was launched in 2020. So with that, it's a timing issue, nothing to do with us.
Takao, could you maybe touch on what does effective numeracy programs look like inside classrooms? I know that's been a priority of JICA. And in terms of when to do an RCT, could you say a little bit about like what you learned between the second and the third impact evaluation in terms of trying to improve the cost effectiveness of the model?
Thank you very much. As I'm not really a pedagogical expert, but let me share my idea. So because of the time limited, I'd like to mention only 2 points. One is in the pedagogy of teaching at the right level, children manipulate concrete objects to understand and to get understanding of the number or the operations. For example, they use straws locally available, collecting the straws and making up 10, and using the straws to do operation of 2-digit minus 1-digit with carrying with borrowing to understand how many straws remain. So like that kind of a manipulation process would help children get the understanding of how the operation works, rather than very much or operational, can I say, formal explanation. And also the curiosity of children is also the foundation to learn. So teaching at the right level includes various plays, number jumps, etc. So that exercise would first raise the curiosity of children on the math. Then next, second question. From the second to third impact evaluations using difference in differences. In the second evaluation, we reduced too much maybe unit cost. We tried to reach as many as possible children. To do that, we reduced the unit cost, but the reduction went too much. That's resulted in the attenuated impact on children. So we reviewed that, and we included the minimum essential teaching and learning materials in the third round of impact evaluations, and we got better results from that. So that's a process of learning between the interaction, research, and practice, I think.
Yeah, what I heard from you this morning was exactly that in the pilot, you had something like $4 per child. And then when you went to the scale up with the difference of differences, when you saw the attenuated effects, you went to 50 cents per child. And then when you kind of went to the second impact evaluation, you went kind of up to $1 per child and then saw the same increases in terms of standard deviation, maybe consistent with some of the points that Jeff mentioned. Sharon, I'm going to give you the last word for our panel. I'm a little bit familiar with the Teaching at the Right Level Africa work, or the catch-up in Zambia, and it's incredible that you interviewed 2,000 teachers. As that goes to expand to all 9,000 primary schools in the country, understanding teacher motivation is absolutely essential. So I know, not to put you on the spot, but in terms of the type of intervention to increase teacher motivation or a sense of self-efficacy, what do you find particularly exciting to test out? And then maybe if you want to pick up on any final points from your perspective as Director of Evaluation for VVOB, the right time to do an RCT or not. And you'll have the last word to close us.
I think I have 13 seconds.
That's perfect.
So about the first point, thank you for that question. I think one thing that we saw a lot, so if we would have unlimited budget available, one thing that we saw kind of touches a little bit about your point that you made about giving that data back to the team that is actually doing the implementation. What we found out in the qualitative work as well, but would be kind of costly to design and set up, is that teachers say that, okay, we're told to do this program, and then besides some assessments, we have no idea how we are doing. So we don't know how we compare to other teachers and other schools, but also it's such a, in a way, kind of just limited data, right? It's only foundational skills. There are also other things, like in other research, we have found that a similar approach also improves students' SEL, for example, or it can improve their engagement. So if we had unlimited funds, it would be really cool if we could generate more data and give that back to the teachers and the schools. About the right time to do an RCT, a lot of important things have been mentioned. It's very difficult to give, like one solid piece of advice. I think, the collaborative part always needs to be there, whether you do an RCT or you do implementation research, because that whole example of like the tablets, that also happens in research, but sometimes it's not that apparent, but sometimes we're asking totally the wrong questions or we use the wrong way to answer these questions. I think, again, giving back the data would be important. And I think also, like, I sometimes feel as a community, we get so hyped about this is the golden standard. We're all going to do RCTs, or this is the golden standards. We're all going to do implementation research. And I think that's natural as humans. And that's why we have trends and fashion, etc. But it's good to look back and really reflect, like, what does this particular research need? And that can only be informed if you actually engage with the stakeholders that are involved. So that would be my advice.
Wonderful note to end on. Please join me in thank you to the panel. I don't want to keep us any further for lunch, but I really enjoyed the contributions from all of you. And I think this idea of efficacy plus and thinking about how to make these quote unquote evidence-based programs more effective and integrated in government systems is absolutely essential. And I welcome your research in these areas. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.